In October 1968, 7 children vanished during a school field trip to Red Hollow Orchard. Their lunches sat untouched, laid in a perfect circle beneath one tree. For 55 years, no trace of them was ever found. Until a drone camera captured movement in those same fields. 7 small figures standing beneath the branches, perfectly still, subscribe, before the harvest moon rises again. Red Hollow, Pennsylvania, October 12, 1968. The school bus rattled down the gravel lane, its yellow paint flashing between trees heavy with fruit. Mrs. Helen Greer counted heads twice and still felt uneasy. 28 students from Pine Ridge Elementary, grades 2 and 3. 7 of them, those who sat near the back, had been whispering all morning about the line. The orchard stretched in measured rows to the horizon. At its heart stood an enormous apple tree, older than the rest, bark blackened by age. Locals called it the mother root. By noon, the air smelled of cider and warm soil. Children unpacked lunches, running in pairs between the trees. Helen turned once toward the bus to fetch more paper cups. When she looked back, the laughter had shifted, muffled somehow, as though swallowed by the wind. She called out names. 21 voices answered. 7 did not. Their lunches were still neatly placed on a gingham blanket, sandwiches untouched, milk bottles sweating in the sun, arranged in a perfect ring around the base of the mother root. By dusk, search parties combed the orchard with lanterns. They found only footprints that stopped abruptly near the centered tree, as if the children had stepped into the soil and kept walking down. At midnight, the sheriff ordered everyone home. The orchard fell silent except for the faint rustle of apples dropping one by one into the circle. Red Hollow, 2024. Emma Vale hadn't meant to teach again. Once, she'd been the face behind Unsolved Tracks, a streaming true crime series that dissected small-town tragedies with surgical precision. But after her husband's death and one too many interviews with grieving mothers, she had packed the cameras away. Red Hollow offered anonymity, a job at the high school, a rented farmhouse, and enough silence to drown in. On a Tuesday afternoon, her media studies class submitted final projects. Most were predictable: skateboard videos, prank edits. But one stood out. Caleb Lorne, quiet honor roll student, had filmed aerial footage of his grandfather's property, the old Red Hollow Orchard. The file name was simple: harvest_line.mp4. Emma clicked play. The screen filled with rolling rows of trees, leaves tinged bronze. The drone hummed steadily, climbing higher. Caleb's voice, distant over the feed, narrated measurements for a class assignment. Then the image jittered, static for half a second, and steadied again. 7 shapes stood beneath a solitary tree, small, motionless, pale against the dark soil. Emma froze the frame. Are those workers? Caleb frowned. There shouldn't be anyone out there. The orchard's been empty since Grandpa sold it to the county. He scrubbed the timeline back and forth. The figures flickered in, then vanished between frames. No motion blur, no transition. One frame they existed, the next, only the shadow of branches. Emma's pulse quickened, the old instinct, the one she'd sworn she buried. Did you film this yesterday? Sunday, around sunset. She looked closer. The 7 figures formed a crescent around the trunk, almost a circle, but not quite closed, as if waiting for someone else to join. Save the original file, she told him quietly. Don't upload it anywhere yet. That night, she replayed the clip on her laptop. In the classroom's sterile light, it had been eerie. In the hush of her rented farmhouse, it was unbearable. The camera's perspective drifted above the orchard like a ghost. At timestamp 3:17, the drone passed over the mother root tree again. A shimmer moved through the leaves, light from below, not above. Emma paused, zoomed in, adjusted contrast. The soil at the base of the tree bulged slightly, almost breathing. She told herself it was heat distortion, a trick of the lens. But when the footage ended, her screen briefly filled with static. One frame held, white letters seared into static. Line ends where route begins. The phrase flickered once, then vanished. Emma slammed the laptop shut. Her breath came shallow, heart hammering in her throat. She hadn't typed that message. Caleb hadn't either. Outside, wind rattled the orchard fence beyond her window. She thought she heard children laughing, distant, high-pitched, almost carried on the breeze. When she stepped onto the porch, the air was sweet with apples, though harvest season had ended weeks ago. Far across the field, a single tree stood taller than the rest, its leaves unnaturally red even under the moon. And for a moment, just a moment, she saw movement around its base. 7 small shadows standing perfectly still. The next morning, Red Hollow was glazed with fog. Mist drifted low across the orchard valley like breath held over something sleeping. Emma parked outside the small brick building that served as both library and historical society. Its front door creaked as if it remembered every secret ever kept inside. She hadn't planned to tell anyone what she'd seen. Not yet, but line ends where route begins had pulled her out of sleep at least 5 times during the night. Each time she'd heard a faint hum, like bees in a jar, and smelled apples. The receptionist at the front desk, a silver-haired woman named Mrs. Carver, looked up as Emma entered. "You're early," she said kindly. "Archives don't open till 9. "I'm not here for a book," Emma said, lowering her voice. "I'm researching the Red Hollow disappearance. The orchard case from '68. For a moment, the woman's expression didn't change. Then the smile faltered. "Oh," that she set down her pen. "We don't usually get questions about that anymore. I'm working on a school project," Emma lied. "Historical documentation." Mrs. Carver hesitated, then nodded toward a door marked Records. "Talk to Lorne," she said. "He keeps the old files. Don't stay down there too long. The lights flicker." The stairwell smelled of damp paper and dust. At the bottom sat Mr. Lorne, a narrow man with thick glasses and nicotine-yellowed fingers. He looked up from a stack of microfilm reels as Emma introduced herself. "Vale," he repeated, like the documentary woman. "Used to be," Emma said. "Now I just teach." "Teaching's safer," he muttered, pushing his glasses higher. "You said you're looking into the orchard case." She nodded. "The missing kids. I heard the files were stored here." He studied her for a long moment before standing and unlocking a rusted filing cabinet. "My father was part of the first search party," he said quietly. "Never got over it." Said the ground hummed under their feet. From the drawer, he withdrew a folder thick with yellowed pages, clipped newspaper articles, and black and white photographs. Every sheet had something written in red pencil along the margin. "Line ends where route begins." Emma's pulse skipped. "Who wrote this?" "No one knows," Lorne said. "Showed up on every copy the county printed." The originals were clean. They tried retyping them. Words came back. He gestured to an old aerial map pinned on the wall. The orchard spread like a chessboard of squares. But 7 trees, circled in red, cut diagonally through the grid. "That's the orchard line," he said. "Old surveyors planted those before the war. Straight as a rifle shot, running from the northern fence to the creek bed." Emma traced the red line with her finger. "And that last tree, the one by the hill? Mother Root." Of course it was. She leafed through photographs. Children in Halloween costumes, school bus parked under bright leaves, search parties with lanterns. One photo caught her eye, an aerial shot taken during the investigation. In the center of the frame, the 7 circled trees formed a perfect diagonal, and at the base of each, a faint light patch, like disturbed soil. "Graves?" she asked. They dug, Lorne said. Found nothing but roots. Thick ones, black. The sheriff ordered them filled back in. Emma closed the folder. The air in the archive seemed heavier now. Can I make copies of these? Lorne hesitated, then nodded. Take what you need. But don't take them home tonight. You'll hear things. She tried to smile. What kind of things? Whispers, he said simply. Children saying your name. Outside, fog still clung to the streets. Emma carried the folder to her car, laid it on the passenger seat, and sat for a moment, staring at her reflection in the windshield. The name Vale had once been synonymous with answers. Now she wasn't sure she wanted any. Back at her farmhouse, she spread the documents across the kitchen table. Afternoon light bled through the curtains, turning the pages amber. She studied one of the typed police reports. The last entry read, October 13th, 1968. Day 2 of search. Discovered ring of lunches intact. Soil warm. Possible geothermal anomaly. Helen Greer reported sound like singing under the ground. No bodies. Case remains open. Emma leaned back. The pages rustled even though there was no breeze. From somewhere outside came the dull thump of something heavy falling. An apple, maybe, from one of the few trees still growing near the road. But when she stepped onto the porch to look, she saw 7 apples in a perfect line along the gravel path, evenly spaced like markers. At the far end of the line, by the fence, a small note fluttered under a stone. She picked it up. The handwriting was uneven, like a child's. We waited until you came back. Her throat went dry. She scanned the orchard beyond her yard. The mist was lifting now, revealing rows of skeletal trunks. But in the distance, where the county land began, a faint shimmer moved through the air, as if the horizon itself were breathing. When she returned inside, every apple on her counter had turned the same dark, bruised red. The rain came without warning the next morning, drumming on the tin roof of Emma's farmhouse with a rhythm that sounded almost intentional, like tapping fingers keeping count. She sat at her kitchen table, the case file open beside a mug gone cold. Every photo, every note, circled back to that same tree and the same phrase scrawled in red pencil. Line ends where route begins. It was after 10 when the call came from the Red Hollow Sheriff's Office. A contractor digging drainage ditches near the old orchard property had unearthed a rusted metal lunchbox. Inside, along with decayed sandwich wrappers, was a small camera and an undeveloped roll of 35mm film. The dispatcher's voice was casual, but Emma's pulse surged. "A camera?" she repeated. "What kind?" "Old Kodak Instamatic," the woman said. "The sheriff thought you might be interested since you used to work in film." She was already reaching for her coat. The sheriff's office was the kind of building that still smelled like coffee and cigarette ash, a relic of the 1970s trapped behind beige cinder-block walls. Sheriff Gaines was a quiet man with skeptical eyes. The lunchbox sat on his desk, mud still crusted around the edges. "Found it 4 feet down," he said. "Guess the county plow hit it. You'll want gloves inside, wrapped in a deteriorating napkin, was the film canister, lightweight, fragile." Emma turned it gently in her hands. The metal was stamped October 1968. "I can get this developed," she said. Mason gave a slow nod. "You think it belonged to one of the missing kids?" "Maybe their teacher," she murmured. Mrs. Greer's report mentioned a student brought a camera. He leaned back, studying her. "You're taking this personally, Miss Vale." She smiled without humor. "I make things personal for a living." Red Hollow's only photo lab was hidden behind a dry cleaner's. The owner, Tommy, was an ex-news photographer who still smelled faintly of developer fluid. She agreed to try the roll, but warned it was badly degraded. "It'll take a few hours," Tommy said, squinting at the film under a magnifier. "This kind of stock turns to dust if you breathe wrong." I'll call when it's ready. Emma spent the wait wandering town, the rain tapering to mist. She found herself parked outside the orchard gate again by late afternoon. Beyond the wire fence, the land looked deserted, but the same lone tree stood upright at the center, its leaves burning crimson even under the gray sky. Something about it felt wrong. The branches didn't sway with the wind. They seemed to resist it, holding still while the air moved around them. Her phone buzzed, jolting her. "Got your pictures," Tommy said. "You better come quick." The prints hung from a drying line when Emma entered the lab. The light was dim and red, the air heavy with chemical warmth. "Most of it's overexposed," Tommy said, pointing. "But these three came through." Emma leaned in. The first image showed children standing in a sunlit clearing, 7 of them, faces blurred, waving toward the camera. The second captured the picnic blanket from the reports, the circle of lunches exactly as described. The third knocked the breath from her. The camera was tilted downward. In the frame, 7 small figures stood around a dark pit at the base of the old tree. Their hands were clasped. Their shadows stretched long and straight, as if they were forming a line. At the pit's center glowed a faint light, a white that seemed to pulse even on the still photograph. "Trick of the exposure?" Tommy asked quietly. Emma didn't answer. She lifted the print closer. The soil in the picture wasn't flat. It bulged upward, shaped as if something below were pressing toward the surface. "What's that?" Tommy said, pointing at the right edge. A figure, barely visible, stood among the trees beyond the children. Taller, watching. The outline was faint but unmistakable. The curve of a woman's dress, one hand raised to shield her eyes from the sun. Emma felt her chest tighten, the posture, the shape. It looked like her. She backed away, nearly bumping the drying line. "Can I keep these?" Tommy hesitated. "You sure you want to?" "Yes." Her voice was steady. "How much?" Tommy waved her off. "Just promise me something." "What?" "If you go out there again, don't go alone." Night had fallen by the time Emma reached her farmhouse. The prints lay spread across her table. The third one weighted flat beneath a glass frame. She studied it until her eyes blurred. The children's faces seemed softer now, almost peaceful. At some point she realized the light outside her window was flickering, orange, rhythmic. She stepped onto the porch. Down the road, near the edge of the orchard, someone had lit a lantern. It swayed slightly, casting a narrow cone of light that touched the fence. For a moment she thought it might be Sheriff Mason, but then the figure holding it stepped backward into the rows of trees, vanishing without sound. She tried calling out. Her voice carried only a few yards before the fog swallowed it. When she turned back toward the house, something glimmered on her front steps. A single apple, glossy red. The skin was etched with faint indentations, as though small fingers had pressed into it. She picked it up carefully. The shape under the skin wasn't random. It formed letters. E-M-M-A. The apple slipped from her hand, rolling down the steps into the dark. Inside, the photo prints rattled lightly on the table, moved by no wind she could feel. The glass over the third picture fogged as if from breath. Beneath the image, faint moisture bloomed across the paper, tracing the same words written on every old police file. "Line ends where route begins." The rain stopped before dawn, leaving the world rinsed and silent. Mist clung to the valley like unspooled breath. Emma hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that photograph. The 7 children in a ring around a hole that glowed from within. Each time she woke, she expected to find dirt beneath her fingernails. She drove to the orchard while the sky was still the color of pewter. The gate hung open, its lock rusted away long ago. Beyond it, rows of skeletal trees stretched like ribs into the fog. She parked beside a half-collapsed barn and stepped out, camera slung over her shoulder, flashlight in hand. The earth was soft from rain. She followed the faint trail leading to the center field. And there it was, the mother root. It shouldn't have been there. County records said the tree had been cut down in 1971, its stump burned to prevent superstitious gatherings. But here it stood again, impossibly whole, its bark darker than the others, its leaves an unnatural crimson even in the washed-out morning. The air around it felt warmer, faintly humming. She circled it slowly, recording footage. Every few seconds the camera's autofocus shuddered, unable to keep the trunk in frame. Up close, she saw something stranger still. A ring of newer growth, saplings, had sprouted evenly around the base, forming a perfect circle. Their roots intertwined like woven cords, gripping the soil. Emma crouched and touched the trunk. The wood was warm, alive, and beneath her palm she felt a steady rhythm, like a pulse. She withdrew her hand, trembling. "No," she whispered. "No, it's just heat." But the hum deepened, resonating through the soles of her boots. She took a cutting, a small branch to test, telling herself it was only evidence. The shears clicked. Sap bled from the break, dark and viscous. When she sealed it inside a sample bag, the humming ceased, leaving only silence and the faint sound of her breathing. Back at her car, she placed the branch on the passenger seat. By the time she reached the main road, the plastic had fogged from inside. That evening, she brought the sample to the high school's biology lab. The janitor let her in after hours. Under the fluorescent lights, the branch looked almost ordinary, until she cut it. The inner wood was black, glossy, and warm to the touch. When she leaned close, she caught the scent of apples and something metallic. Under the microscope, she saw faint motion within the sap, microscopic threads pulsing in rhythm. Organic, yet not plant-like, almost like nerves. Her camera recorded it all. The footage glowed faintly, as if the sap emitted its own light. Halfway through the recording, the power flickered. The microscope's lamp dimmed, then died. Emma froze, listening. From the far end of the lab came a sound like someone whispering her name. She turned slowly. The room was empty, rows of tables, glassware gleaming in the dim light. But the whisper came again, nearer this time. "We're still growing." Her breath caught. The sound came from the sample bag. The branch inside was trembling slightly, pressing against the plastic. She reached for it, and the light snapped back on. The bag was still. The branch lay motionless. She told herself she'd imagined it. Stress, exhaustion, old trauma masquerading as pattern. She sealed the lab, locked the door behind her, and left the building without looking back. Driving home through the dark, she noticed the orchard from the highway, a red glow seeping faintly between the trees, like embers under ash. When she reached her farmhouse, she found the prints from the lunchbox camera still on the table. The third one, the ring of children, had darkened since she'd last seen it. The soil in the photograph looked deeper now, the light from the hole dimmer, and something else had changed. There was an eighth shadow among them. She brought the photo close to the lamp. The new figure stood at the circle's edge, its outline taller, head slightly bowed. She traced it with her finger. The faintest indentation in the photo's emulsion met her touch, a fingerprint pressed from the inside. Sleep came only in fragments. Sometime after 2 a.m., she dreamed of the orchard again. Rows of trees under a red sky, apples hanging like lanterns. The mother root stood at the center, leaves whispering. Beneath it, the children waited, pale faces upturned. One of them stepped forward, a girl with hair the color of wheat. "We didn't run," the child said. "We followed the line." Emma tried to speak, but her mouth filled with soil, sweet, earthy, warm. The girl smiled. "You'll understand when it's your turn." She woke gasping, the taste of earth still on her tongue. The clock read 4:42. The next morning, the branch sample was gone. The lab door's lock showed no damage, but the desk where she'd left it was clean, as though it had never been there. A faint stain of sap marked the floor, spreading toward the hallway like a trail. She followed it to the exit. Outside, small prints dotted the dew on the grass, barefoot, child-sized, leading straight toward the orchard. Emma's stomach turned. She looked back once at the school windows. Her own reflection wavered there, and for an instant she saw a second face beside hers. The face smiled. She spent the rest of the day driving the perimeter of the orchard, trying to locate an access road. Every time she turned onto the dirt lanes, her GPS glitched, resetting the coordinates to 0.0. By dusk, fog rose again, thick and low. She parked near the gate and filmed the tree line. The red leaves of the mother root caught the last of the sun, glowing like embers. She whispered into the camera, voice steady despite the chill racing her spine. "This is Emma Vale, recording. Date October 13th, 2024. If anyone finds this footage, don't come here after dark. The tree is alive. The children, if that's what they are still with it." She lowered the camera. From somewhere deep in the orchard came the sound of apples falling, slow, deliberate, one after another. 7 thuds, evenly spaced, and then a voice, young, clear, impossibly close. 8 now. Emma froze, scanning the rows, flashlight trembling in her hand. Nothing moved. The night was empty except for the rustle of leaves and the steady hum rising from the earth. Back home, she downloaded the footage. At timestamp 8:12, she saw herself lower the camera. The sound of falling apples played as she remembered. But when she listened closely, beneath it ran another sound, soft, rhythmic, a heartbeat. She adjusted the contrast. In the last frame before she turned away, the reflection in her camera lens showed a different scene. Children standing under the tree, hands clasped, one space open in their circle, waiting. The county nursing home sat on the edge of Red Hollow, where the orchards thinned into fields of frost-bitten grass. The building was a low brick rectangle with narrow windows and the quiet hum of machines somewhere beneath the walls. Emma signed her name at the front desk, hands still trembling slightly from the drive. She had called ahead that morning. The voice on the line, fragile but lucid, had belonged to Helen Greer, the substitute teacher who had taken Pine Ridge's class to the orchard the day 7 children disappeared. Helen was 90 now, her memory drifting in and out like weak radio signal. But she'd agreed to see Emma. "I remember the tree," she'd said softly, "and the sound it made when it woke up." An orderly led Emma down a hallway that smelled of antiseptic and apples. At the end sat a woman in a wheelchair, her hair white as cotton, a blanket folded over her knees. Her eyes, though clouded, were clear enough to track Emma as she approached. "Miss Greer," the old woman smiled faintly. "You've come to ask about the line?" Emma froze. "How did you know?" Helen laughed, a soft, dry sound. "You have that look. All of you do. When it's your turn." They sat by the window where weak sunlight pooled on the floor. Outside, a nurse was scattering breadcrumbs for sparrows. "It wasn't supposed to be my class that day," Helen said, her voice trembling. "Mrs. Delaney was sick, so they called me in. I didn't know the orchard. The owner, old man Lorne, told us to stay between the rows, said there was an old survey line under the ground, feeding water through the roots. He called it the orchard line." She closed her eyes briefly, as though seeing it again. "The children kept asking what would happen if they crossed it. I told them not to. That's what the rules said. Never cross the line." Emma leaned forward. "But they did." Helen nodded. "I turned my back for a minute to fetch water. The wind picked up. There was a sound, like humming. When I turned again, they were gone. All I saw were their lunches, arranged in a circle. She lifted a trembling hand, tracing the shape in the air. It wasn't play. They'd been standing in that ring, listening to something under the ground. I could feel it through my shoes, a vibration like a song too low to hear. Her gaze drifted past Emma, unfocused. We found the bus driver sitting on the hood, staring at nothing. He said he saw light coming up through the dirt. Thought it was the sun until he realized it was below him. Emma swallowed. What kind of light? Helen's voice fell to a whisper. Warm, golden, like a lantern through honey. The roots were shining. A nurse appeared with medication. Helen waved her away. Just a few more minutes. She looked back at Emma, eyes sharp for a fleeting moment. It wasn't the tree that took them, dear. It was what the roots reached for. There's something beneath Red Hollow. Something older than the orchard, the irrigation tunnels. Helen shook her head slowly. Older. We built over it and called it ours, but it remembers who walked above. Emma hesitated. Do you remember what they were saying, the children, before they vanished? Helen's lips trembled. They said the apples were whispering, that they could hear their names. Then they started repeating something I didn't understand. She frowned, voice thinning. The roots go down. The line goes home, they kept saying, over and over. Outside, the sparrows startled into flight, wings flashing in the glass. Emma felt the air tighten around her. What happened to you afterward? I tried to leave Red Hollow, Helen said. Tried to teach somewhere else, but every fall, I dream the same dream. The tree grows back, taller than before. The children are there, standing in the circle, and every year there's one more of them. Her eyes found Emma's. 7 that first year. Then 8, Emma's breath caught. They'll keep growing until the circle closes. Helen's nurse returned, urging rest. Emma stood reluctantly, notebook clutched tight. Before she could thank her, Helen gripped her wrist with surprising strength. Do you have roots here, Miss Vale? Emma blinked. No. Helen's grip tightened. You will. Her eyes clouded again, her hand falling limp. It's almost harvest, she murmured. Don't go back to the orchard when the leaves turn red. That's when it remembers best outside. Clouds gathered like smoke over the valley. Emma sat in her car for a long time, recording notes into her phone. Her voice sounded detached, documentary calm even as her pulse raced. Interview with Helen Greer, October 14th. Subject confirms pre-existing legend of an underground network beneath Red Hollow Orchard. Reports of vibration and light consistent with geothermal or electrical anomalies. Repetition of the phrase, the roots go down. The line goes home. Possible cult symbolism. She stopped recording, the word cult tasting wrong. This wasn't ritual. It was something deeper, physical, alive. As she pulled onto the highway, she caught sight of the orchard in her rearview mirror. Even through the rising fog, she could see the mother root's crimson leaves catching the last of the light. For an instant, she thought she saw 7 figures standing beneath it. Children, maybe. But when she blinked, the image was gone. That night, she set up her camera in the living room and projected the old photographs onto the wall. The circle of children, the hole in the ground, the faint glow beneath them. In the background, she noticed something she hadn't before. A faint blur near the edge of the frame, almost transparent. When she enhanced the image, her own reflection looked back from the print, older, eyes hollow. The projector light flickered. The bulb hummed once, twice, then died, plunging the room into darkness. Emma exhaled. Then came the smallest sound, the scrape of wood from outside, branches against glass. She turned slowly toward the window. Red leaves brushed the pane, though no tree stood near enough to reach it. One by one they fell away, leaving behind 7 small handprints pressed in dew on the glass. Emma spread the old orchard maps across her living room floor. the paper yellowed and soft at the folds. Each one bore a red pencil line drawn through the center, diagonal, unwavering, connecting 7 circles marked Tree 1 through Tree 7. When she overlapped the survey maps from 1938, 1954, and 1968, the line stayed perfect, slicing through every generation of orchard design. It wasn't just a planting pattern. It was deliberate. She laid the most recent satellite image, Caleb's drone still frame, on top. The mother root stood at the southern end, right where all lines converged. Beneath it, faint distortions radiated outward in concentric rings, like a fingerprint pressed into soil. On the margin of one map, in faint pencil, someone had written, "Beneath line equals access tunnel." Emma's breath hitched. Tunnels. Lorne had mentioned his grandfather's irrigation experiments, underground water routes that fed the trees. She turned off the lights and ran her fingers along the paper, tracing the route from north to south. Her fingertips stopped at the end of the line. The mother root. The paper felt warm beneath her skin. The house groaned in the wind, boards settling like old lungs. Then, so faint she almost missed it, a rhythmic vibration through the floor, like someone knocking softly from beneath the earth. She froze. It lasted 3 beats, then silence. The next morning she packed her camera, flashlight, and a crowbar. She told herself she was documenting, not trespassing. The road to the orchard was empty, morning fog rolling low. At the gate, a county sign leaned half-collapsed. Property closed, subsurface hazard. She ducked under it. The air between the trees was damp and metallic. Dew clung to her coat. She followed the diagonal through the rows, counting the 7 trees, each older, blacker, more knotted than the last. At the base of the final tree, the mother root. The soil looked disturbed. She knelt, pushing away damp leaves. The earth crumbled easily, revealing something hard beneath. Rusted metal, circular, the size of a manhole cover. Her pulse thudded in her ears. She brushed it clean. Stamped into the metal was the same phrase, "Line ends where root begins." The edges were sealed with years of compacted dirt. She wedged the crowbar under the lip and pried. The ground moaned. The lid shifted, releasing a breath of air that smelled like apples and rot. Below, darkness and the faint sound of dripping water. She aimed her flashlight. A ladder descended into a narrow tunnel of wood and stone. Roots hung like cords from the ceiling, slick with moisture. The beam caught something glinting at the bottom, metal piping perhaps, or rails. She hesitated. Then she heard it again. The hum, low and steady, resonating up through the ladder. She began to climb. The air grew warmer the deeper she went. The walls pulsed faintly, alive with the smell of sap and wet soil. 10 feet down, she reached the tunnel floor. The space stretched in both directions, timber beams arching overhead. Pipes ran along one wall, labeled in faded stencils. Irrigation line A to G. But they weren't pipes. The flashlight beam revealed smooth, organic curves. Roots, hollowed from within, filled with faintly glowing liquid that pulsed in rhythm. She knelt beside one. The light inside throbbed with slow warmth, golden and steady, like a heartbeat. Her recorder clicked on automatically. She hadn't touched it. A faint crackle, then her own voice, though she wasn't speaking. 7 planted, 7 fed. The line carries more than water. She froze. The voice was hers, unmistakably, but older, weary. "Who's there?" she whispered. The tunnel answered with a single drop of water hitting stone. She followed the route southward, deeper underground. The tunnel sloped gradually until the air thickened with humidity. Ahead, faint light shimmered, pale and rhythmic. When she reached the end, she found a chamber carved from rock. The roots converged there, forming a twisted column that reached into the ceiling. At its base, Embedded in the soil were 7 small lunch boxes, half rusted but intact. Her flashlight quivered. One of them was open. Inside lay a child's shoe, perfectly preserved. Next to it, a photograph, black and white, edges curled. It showed the orchard from above. The 7 children stood in a straight line this time, not a circle. Their shadows formed a perfect diagonal running through the trees, the same line she'd traced on the map. At the end of the line stood a woman with a camera, her face blurred, but the silhouette unmistakable, her own. Something shifted in the dark behind her, a rustle, the faint creak of wood. Emma spun around. The tunnel was empty, but the roots on the walls were moving, stretching slightly toward the light. A whisper slid through the air, close enough to feel. The line ends where the next begins. She stumbled backward, nearly dropping the flashlight. The roots trembled, shedding flecks of soil that fell like dust. The hum deepened, vibrating through her bones. She ran, hands brushing slick walls, breath ragged, until she reached the ladder. The air at the surface shimmered with gold. She climbed fast, bursting out into sunlight. The orchard looked different. The fog was gone, the sky too bright. Every tree's leaves had turned the same deep red, the color of fresh blood. She wiped soil from her face and looked back at the hole. The lid had vanished. In its place, new roots were already pushing through the soil, weaving themselves closed. The mother root's branches above rustled in a wind that hadn't existed seconds before. At the center of its trunk, sap seeped from a fresh split in the bark. The color wasn't amber. It was crimson. Emma lifted her camera, filming the trunk. The hum still vibrated beneath her feet, faint but rhythmic. The tree pulsed once, twice. On the viewfinder, she saw movement. Not the branches, reflections. 7 pale figures beneath the tree, faint as mist. They stood in a line, each holding something shiny. Apples. The 8th space, at the end, was still empty. Emma lowered the camera. The hum stopped. For the first time in days, the air was silent. She whispered into the microphone, her voice barely audible. The orchard line is alive, and it's waiting for someone to close it. That night, when she uploaded the footage to her laptop, the file labeled itself automatically 8of8.mov. The thumbnail showed the orchard at dawn, though she hadn't filmed it then. The mother root stood in the center, its shadow stretching perfectly straight toward the horizon, long enough to touch the foundations of her farmhouse. The Harvest Festival had always been Red Hollow's proudest tradition. A day when the orchard opened to the public, cider poured freely, and every family in town came together under the mother root's flame-red canopy. But this year felt different. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Emma stood at the edge of the square that morning, her camera trained on the crowd. Music drifted from the bandstand, though even the fiddle sounded strained, out of tune with the season. The mother root loomed behind the fairgrounds, its branches blazing scarlet against the gray sky. Big turnout this year, Sheriff Gaines said, appearing beside her with 2 steaming paper cups of cider. His face was lined deeper than before, his usual confidence subdued. Guess folks need something cheerful. Emma accepted the cup, though her hands trembled slightly. Has the orchard been reopened officially? He shook his head. Still closed. But the committee couldn't imagine harvest without it. Lorne agreed to keep the southern rows fenced off. She followed his gaze toward the distant trees, where a temporary barrier of rope and wood stretched between rows. It looked flimsy, symbolic at best. Beyond it, the orchard seemed darker, almost absorbing the light. The sheriff took a slow sip. You've stirred up talk, Miss Vale. Folks say you've been seeing things out there. I've been documenting things, she said carefully. He studied her face. You ever think maybe Red Hollow needs its ghosts left alone? Emma looked back at the orchard. That's what everyone's done for 70 years. And the orchard's still feeding by dusk. The crowd had gathered near the stage for the lantern lighting. Children held paper globes strung on sticks, their light soft and golden against the deepening dark. Emma stood apart, filming the ceremony. The mayor's voice carried across the field. For 7 generations, our orchard has fed us, sheltered us, defined us. Tonight, under the harvest moon, we give thanks a cheer rose. Lanterns were lifted, and then an unnatural tremor. It was subtle at first, like a passing truck, but no road lay near enough. The earth underfoot gave a small, decisive shudder, and several lanterns flickered out. The music stopped. A low hum rolled through the ground, familiar, ancient, alive. Emma swung her camera toward the orchard. The mother root's branches swayed though no wind stirred. Red leaves rained down like sparks. People gasped. Someone screamed. "Earthquake!" the sheriff shouted. But even as he spoke, the sound deepened. Not cracking or rumbling, but pulsing. A heartbeat. Emma ran forward, camera shaking in her hands. The rope fence around the southern rows sagged, then split. Children were already slipping through, chasing drifting lanterns that floated toward the dark trees. "Get them back!" Gaines shouted, sprinting after them. Emma followed, breath sharp, shoes sinking into soft ground. The hum intensified as she neared the mother root. Its trunk was glowing faintly, a deep amber radiance seeping from the cracks in the bark. The light pulsed with the rhythm she'd felt underground. A child stood at the base of the tree, staring upward in wonder. His lantern flickered between his hands. "Sweetheart, come here," Emma called. Her voice barely carried above the sound. He didn't move. His eyes were fixed on something above. And then Emma saw it too. Faces in the leaves, pale outlines shifting between the branches, too symmetrical to be tricks of light. 7 of them. Children. They were whispering, mouths moving in unison, though the words were lost in the hum. The boy dropped his lantern. It rolled against a root and extinguished. Emma reached him, grabbing his shoulders. "Don't look," she cried, turning him away. But his expression was serene, entranced. Behind them, the crowd surged in panic. Parents calling names, people fleeing toward the square. Only a handful remained, Sheriff Gaines among them, staring up at the impossible glow. The mother root shuddered once, releasing a shower of crimson leaves. The hum cut out. Silence fell like a curtain. Emma blinked, breath ragged. The boy in her arms began to cry softly. Gaines approached, face pale. "What the hell was that?" Before she could answer, her camera beeped. Automatic playback. The last frame it had recorded appeared on the small screen. The mother root from below, its branches fanning into a perfect spiral. In the center of the spiral, a new pattern of leaves had formed. 8 figures standing in a line. Her heart stuttered. "Sheriff," she whispered, turning the screen toward him. "There were 7 before." Gaines looked. And now, the line's complete. The festival broke apart soon after. Power flickered across town. Several streetlights blew out entirely. By midnight, Red Hollow lay in blackout. Emma sat in her farmhouse with candles burning low, replaying the footage frame by frame. Each time, her reflection appeared in the viewfinder, closer, sharper, until in the final second, her face replaced the last child's in the line. She turned off the camera. Outside, the orchard glowed faintly under the full moon. A knock came at the door. Slow, deliberate. Emma froze, candlelight trembling. 3 knocks, then silence. She opened it cautiously. No one stood outside, but on the porch lay a bundle of leaves tied with twine. She unwrapped them carefully. Inside was a single apple, its skin dark red, almost black. Carved into it were the words, "Harvest is over. Line is fed." The apple pulsed once beneath her fingertips, a faint, living throb, then went still. She dropped it. It rolled across the porch and came to rest beside her boot, leaking a single drop of crimson sap that shimmered like blood in the candlelight. In the distance, the orchard's hum began again, soft and steady, matching the rhythm of her heartbeat. And though she tried not to listen, she realized it was no longer just a sound. It was a call. Dawn came gray and heavy. The orchard was quiet again, but Red Hollow wasn't. Word of the light show spread overnight, though no one could explain what they'd seen. Some said it was gases from the soil. Others claimed it was staged by Emma herself for her documentary. By the time she stepped out onto her porch, reporters were parked along the lane, cameras pointed toward the orchard like rifles. "Miss Vale!" Is it true the trees glowed red? Were children hurt during the collapse? Are you working with law enforcement? She walked past them without speaking, clutching her satchel close. The air smelled of burnt sugar and iron. The apple she'd dropped the night before was gone, leaving only a faint stain on the wood, the same hue as dried blood. She drove to the Historical Society, where old records were stored in the church basement. Sheriff Gaines was already there, leaning against the desk with a cigarette unlit between his fingers. He nodded as she entered. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked. "I don't think the orchard lets anyone sleep anymore," she replied. He gestured toward a stack of ledgers on the table. "Town birth and death records. You said something about finding names." She flipped open the oldest one, 1899, handwritten in black ink. The smell of mildew and dust filled the air. Most entries were ordinary: births, marriages, harvest yields. But near the middle, in a section labeled Lineage Accounts, one entry made her stop. Harold Vale, orchard keeper, listed as 8th custodian of the line. Her grandfather. Beneath his name, a faded note in smaller script, 8th chosen by the line itself. To close the circle, one must remember. She stared at it until the words blurred. "My family wasn't from here until after the war," she said quietly. "That's what my mother always told me." Gaines frowned. "Looks like that's not true." She flipped the page. There, in darker ink, another name appeared. Circled in red long ago. Emma Vale, born 1989. Provisional keeper, pending the lines her breath caught. The record was nearly 40 years old. "That's not possible," she whispered. "This was written before I was born." Gaines leaned over her shoulder, reading it twice. "Somebody expected you." She turned to him, voice trembling. "The orchard completes itself." The 8th shadow wasn't missing. It was me. They drove back to the orchard at midday. The sky was clear, the trees deceptively peaceful. The town council had cordoned off the festival grounds, but Gaines's badge got them through. The mother root stood unchanged, no sign of last night's glow. Yet when Emma touched the trunk, warmth pulsed beneath the bark, rhythmic and slow. "You sure about this?" Gaines asked. "I need to see where the hum starts." They followed the diagonal path again, counting each ancient tree. At the 6th, Emma paused. Carved into its trunk were faint initials, EV. The letters looked freshly cut. "I didn't do this," she said. "Someone wants you to think you did," Gaines murmured. Beyond it lay the 7th tree, older and hollow. The earth around its roots had caved slightly, revealing the top of a buried lunchbox like those she'd seen underground. She crouched and brushed away dirt. The metal gleamed faintly, newer than the rest. Inside was a photograph, laminated to preserve it. It showed 7 children standing in a line beside the mother root. But this time, none of them were from the 1954 missing group. They were townspeople's kids. Modern clothes, sneakers, one even wearing a Red Hollow Little League shirt. And standing at the far end of the line, her own face, blurred but unmistakable, camera in hand. Gaines swore under his breath. When was this taken? She flipped it over. The back bore a date. October 12th, 2024. Tomorrow. That night she couldn't bring herself to sleep. Every sound of settling wood made her flinch. The footage from the festival played on loop on her laptop, until she noticed something new. In the final frame, behind the row of children, a faint shadow stretched across the ground. It was taller than the rest, almost adult-shaped, extending from the base of the mother root toward the lens. She magnified the image. The shadow was hers, and it wasn't still. Frame by frame, it moved. One step closer each second, until it reached the camera and the feed cut to static. Her pulse quickened. The room seemed to hum again, low and resonant. She turned off the laptop. The hum didn't stop. Outside her window, the orchard glowed faintly red beneath the moonlight. At 3:17 a.m., her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Come to the line. It's time to close it. She called Gaines, but there was no answer. The hum grew louder, vibrating through the floorboards, through her teeth. Something inside her said go. She dressed quickly, grabbed her flashlight and camera, and drove toward the orchard. The road was deserted. The air shimmered faintly as if heat were rising from the cold ground. At the gate, the rope barrier had been torn away. A single lantern burned at the first tree, marking the start of the line. She followed it. Each tree glowed softly at the base, sap bleeding like veins of molten gold. The air was heavy with the smell of cider and wet leaves. When she reached the mother root, she stopped. The earth had split open. Where the hatch once lay, a narrow stairway now descended into darkness, lit by the same golden glow that pulsed beneath the bark. Her camera clicked on by itself, the lens adjusting. On the screen appeared a message she hadn't typed, Rec 8/8, entry required. She whispered, I don't understand. From below, a voice echoed, faint, childlike. We've been waiting for you, Emma. Her knees weakened. Lucinda, she whispered, recognizing one of the 1954 victims' names from the archives. Silence. Then another voice. Lower, older. The orchard remembers what the town forgets? The hum rose again, deeper now, almost musical. Emma descended. The tunnel had changed. The roots no longer dripped water but light, glowing amber and red. At the far end, the 7 lunchboxes she'd seen before were open, contents removed. In their place lay 7 golden apples, pulsing faintly. A figure stood behind them. He was thin, stooped, dressed in soil-stained coveralls. His face was half in shadow, but his eyes glowed with reflected gold. You shouldn't be here, he said. Who are you? She managed. The caretaker, he replied. My family tended the orchard before yours. But we stopped choosing who the line would take. Your grandfather, he promised to feed it again when the time came. Emma's voice trembled. Feed it? The orchard doesn't live on sunlight alone. Every 40 years, it takes back what was given. The children kept it sleeping. You woke it. He stepped closer, extending something toward her. A folded photograph. She took it. It was the same image she'd found in the lunchbox. But now the 8th figure's face was clear, her own. The caretaker smiled sadly. You finish what your family began. The 8th completes the harvest. The hum surged into a roar. The roots glowed so brightly they cast shadows on the tunnel walls. Emma felt the ground pulse beneath her boots, alive, pulling. She turned and ran, the camera swinging wildly, light flashing across roots like veins. The tunnel seemed to close behind her, earth tightening. When she reached the ladder, hands, small, cold, childlike, brushed her ankles. She climbed faster, bursting into the open air just as dawn broke over the hills. The mother root stood still again, crimson leaves motionless in the morning light. But when she looked down at her hands, fine red dust clung to her skin, like powdered sap. It pulsed once, faintly, then faded. In the distance, the orchard whispered with the sound of children's laughter. Morning in Red Hollow tasted like rust and rain. Emma parked on the gravel shoulder above the orchard, camera in her lap, eyes fixed on the mother root. After everything that had happened in the tunnel, the surface looked impossibly calm. Dew silvering the branches, a flock of starlings rolling over the field like smoke. She couldn't stop replaying the caretaker's words. The orchard doesn't live on sunlight alone. When she closed her eyes, she saw his face. Skin gray with soil, voice like roots breaking through stone, and the photograph still folded in her pocket. 8 figures under the tree, her own face among them. She started the recorder. October 15th. The line is complete, but I don't know what that means. The caretaker said my grandfather fed it, that it takes back what was given. Her voice cracked. Was I born because of it, or for it? The recorder hissed and went silent. The sound of tires on gravel startled her. Sheriff Gaines's cruiser rolled up beside her, window down. His eyes looked hollow from lack of sleep. You didn't answer your phone, he said. I went back down there. Christ, Emma. He rubbed his jaw. You could have been buried alive. That place is older than the town itself. Lorne's grandson says his family tried to seal those tunnels back in the 40s. Said the roots just kept growing around the concrete. She studied him. You believe that now? He exhaled smoke. After last night, I believe anything. They sat in silence a moment. The orchard shimmered faintly under the rising sun. What are you going to do? He asked. I need to find out what my grandfather promised. Gaines looked uneasy. Old records say he died in 1954, but the ledger lists him alive in 68, after those kids vanished. Emma's stomach dropped. Then he was there. He nodded. And if he's the one who restarted the line, the rest didn't need to be said. She drove to the town cemetery that afternoon. The Vales had a small family plot on the far hill, shaded by apple trees that had long since gone wild. Her grandfather's stone was there, cracked and half sunk. Harold Vale, 1908 to 1954. She knelt, brushing moss from the name. The soil at the base was disturbed, fresh, damp, as though something beneath had shifted. A whisper passed through the branches above. It almost sounded like her own voice. 8th chosen by the line itself. Emma reached out, fingertips pressing into the earth. It was warm. When she pulled her hand away, her palm was stained red, not with blood, but sap. And for a moment, she felt something pulsing under the ground, matching her heartbeat perfectly. Back in her car, she unrolled the old map of the orchard again. She realized something she hadn't before. The diagonal line of trees extended past the property, straight toward this hill, straight toward the Vale graves. Her breath hitched. The line didn't end at the orchard at all. It ended here. She started the engine, gripping the steering wheel hard. The hum began again beneath the road, low and steady, as if the earth itself were waking. The line goes home, Helen Greer had said. Now she knew where home was. The hum followed her back down into the valley, a vibration that seemed to rise from the tires rather than the engine. At every bend in the road, she caught glimpses of the orchard between the trees, branches quivering though there was no wind. By the time she reached her farmhouse, the sky had gone the color of bruised copper. She went straight to her desk, opened the folder from the archive, and spread the photocopies of her grandfather's notes. Most were practical, weather records, pruning dates, but the last few pages were stranger, almost prayers written in shorthand. If the line starves, the harvest dies. One must remember so the others may rest. 8 keeps the circle. The line is vain. The root The heart. Her fingers trembled over the last line. 8 keeps the circle. She whispered, 8 keeps me. Something clicked behind her, soft, metallic. She turned. Her camera had switched on by itself. The lens whirred, focusing on the empty hallway. Then it began to record. "Stop," she said, crossing the room. Before she could reach it, the screen brightened. A live image appeared. Not her hallway, but the orchard at night, filmed from above. The drone's perspective. 7 lights glowed under the mother root, forming a perfect line. Then an 8th flare bloomed at the far end, the color of the candlelight on her desk. She realized, too late, that the light was her house. Outside, the wind rose suddenly, carrying the smell of apples and wet bark. The field beyond her fence shimmered faintly, red seeping through the grass like ink. She stepped onto the porch. The hum was no longer distant. It was everywhere, in her chest, in the railings beneath her hands, in the bones of the house. From the orchard came a slow creaking, wood against wood. Branches parted as though something large were pushing upward through them. Emma's phone buzzed. Another message, same unknown number. "Bring the camera." The promise is due. She looked toward the horizon. A single beam of golden light had broken through the cloud cover, shining directly on the mother root. Her pulse steadied. There was fear, but also something deeper. Recognition. Every generation had turned away. Maybe remembering was all the orchard wanted. She lifted the camera, started recording, and whispered into the mic. "If you find this, don't destroy the orchard. It remembers for all of us." Then she walked into the light. At sunrise the next day, Sheriff Gaines found her car abandoned by the gate. The camera lay on the driver's seat, still recording. He picked it up, hands shaking. The final clip showed the orchard bathed in golden dawn. The mother root glowed softly. Between its roots, something new had sprouted. A young sapling, leaves pale and trembling. 8 branches grew from its stem. That night, Gaines filed his report. Missing person, Emma Vale. He paused before signing, staring at the date, October 15th, 2024, then wrote one more line at the bottom, "The orchard hums only when it remembers." When he stepped outside, the moon was rising, full and red. In the distance, the orchard shimmered faintly, whispering through the wind his own name. Sheriff Gaines sat alone in his office long after dark, the glow of Emma's camera screen painting his face in flickering light. The building was silent except for the faint hum of the hard drive as the video replayed again and again. The first minute showed her car idling at the orchard gate, headlights cutting through fog. Then the view shifted, her voice steady, whispering into the mic. "If you find this, don't destroy the orchard. It remembers for all of us." After that, she walked into the light. The footage warped. The image bled red, then white. Gaines leaned forward, frame by frame, until he noticed it. In the final second before the overexposure, the mother root's shadow split, revealing a faint stairway beneath the roots. The glow came from below. He shut the laptop and rubbed his eyes. For 50 years he'd heard stories about the hum, the missing kids, the tree that refused to die. He dismissed them as superstition. But Emma had been right. The orchard was alive, and now it had taken her. Just before dawn, he drove back out. The mist was thin, the fields silver with frost. From a distance, the mother root looked peaceful, almost beautiful. Up close, the soil around its trunk pulsed faintly, breathing. He set up a flood lamp and unspooled the police tape. As light spilled over the roots, something glittered. Metal. He brushed away dirt and found another lunchbox. The 8th. Inside lay Emma's ID badge, smeared with sap, and a folded note in the same handwriting that had haunted the old files. "Line ends where root begins. The light keeps what we forget." He stared at the words until the hum started again, low enough to feel in his ribs. It rose from the ground in a slow crescendo. The tree's bark began to glow, amber leaking from the cracks like molten glass. Gaines stepped back, shielding his face. Beneath the hum, a chorus of small voices murmured, children laughing softly, repeating a rhythm like a lullaby. Then he heard Emma's voice join them. "Remember kindly." The glow flared once and faded. The hum stopped. When Gaines looked again, the trunk had sealed itself, smooth as untouched wood. The ground was cool, no trace of the lunchbox, no sign of the note. Only his own footprints circling the tree, proof that he'd ever been there. He switched off the lamp. The orchard stood silent, still. Yet, as he turned toward the road, he thought he heard a faint click, the sound of a camera shutter somewhere behind him. He didn't dare look back. Gaines didn't sleep. He drove straight from the orchard to the station, the hum still vibrating somewhere behind his sternum like the echo of a train that never arrived. He locked himself inside the evidence room, spread Emma's files on the metal table, and played the last minutes of her recording one more time. This time, he watched without sound. When the image burned out, he froze the final white frame and lifted the brightness a few notches. The overexposure softened, revealing faint outlines hidden in the glare. 7 figures standing behind Emma, their hands clasped, faces tilted toward the lens. At the bottom of the frame, in the reflection of her camera, a faint symbol glimmered, a spiral branching into 8 points. He printed the still and pinned it to the corkboard above his desk. The station's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. One flickered out completely. By afternoon, townspeople began to gather outside the courthouse. Rumors spread fast. Emma Vale was missing. The sheriff had been at the orchard before dawn. The trees were glowing again. Someone even claimed they'd heard singing drifting over the valley at sunrise. Gaines stepped outside. The crowd parted, wary. For years, he'd been the voice of reason, the man who told them the orchard stories were old fear dressed as folklore. Now his silence said otherwise. "Listen to me," he began, voice raw. "The orchard isn't cursed, it's remembering. It's holding on to what this town chose to bury. Every time we dig, it wakes up to remind us who we lost." A murmur rippled through the crowd. An old farmer pushed forward. "You saying it took that woman same as the kids?" Gaines looked down at his hands, still stained faintly red. "No, I think she gave herself to it." The words hung there. No one spoke again. At dusk, he returned alone. The sky had turned the color of cider, clouds bruised violet at the edges. The mother root stood at the center of the field, taller than ever. Between its roots, a new growth shone, a young tree, no higher than his shoulder, its bark pale and smooth. He knelt beside it. The soil was warm, pulsing faintly. Beneath the new trunk, something glinted. Emma's camera, half buried, lens pointed upward. He dug it free and powered it on. The battery shouldn't have lasted, yet the screen lit immediately. A single file appeared, root_light_final.mov. He pressed play. The footage was steady, unlike her earlier recordings. The view showed the tunnel below the orchard, roots glowing softly. The children stood there again, serene, hands linked. Emma's voice whispered over the image. "Every memory needs a keeper. When the 8th remembers, the others can rest." The children turned toward the camera, smiling. Then one of them, a girl with wheat-colored hair, stepped forward and placed an apple at the foot of the lens. The image blurred, brightness blooming until it filled the frame. The video ended on pure white. Gaines closed the camera. The new sapling rustled though the air was still. On its smallest branch, an apple had already formed. Small, golden, and pulsing with faint light. He lifted it gently. The warmth beneath its skin matched his heartbeat exactly. "Rest," he said quietly, placing it back among the leaves. The orchard sighed, the hum fading to silence. For the first time in months, Red Hollow felt still. Morning came soft and strange. When the first sunlight touched Red Hollow, it fell not on fog or frost, but on a shimmer, like dew that glowed faintly from within. The orchard beyond the ridge looked alive in a way no one had ever seen. The trees that had stood bare for decades now burst with pale blossoms overnight. Each petal gleamed with a glassy translucence, and a faint hum drifted down the valley like distant bees, or a buried choir warming its breath. By 7 o'clock, half the town had gathered at the ridge. They didn't speak at first. Even the birds seemed hesitant to interrupt. Sheriff Gaines stood apart from them, hands in his coat pockets, eyes fixed on the mother root. The young sapling beside it was taller now, impossibly so. In one night it had grown nearly a foot, its branches already heavy with small glowing fruit. "Looks like spring came early," someone muttered. "No," another whispered. "That's not spring." That's something else Gaines heard but didn't answer. The hum beneath the air was deeper now, layered, almost like breathing. He thought of Emma Vale's voice in the recording. Every memory needs a keeper. The orchard, he realized, was no longer just remembering. It was rebuilding. By midday, the news vans arrived. Red Hollow hadn't seen media traffic since the Holloway 5 anniversary decades ago, but now reporters swarmed the old road, their microphones trembling in the wind. They wanted a statement. Gaines gave them none. He walked past them into the orchard itself. As soon as his boots touched the soil, the hum changed pitch. He paused, heartbeat thudding in rhythm with the ground. A small white petal drifted down and landed on his shoulder. The moment it touched fabric, a vision flickered behind his eyes. Lucia Holloway running through rows of apple trees, laughing, calling out names. Her voice echoed for only a heartbeat before the vision snapped away, leaving Gaines gasping. He looked up. The orchard wasn't just growing. It was showing. In the shimmer between branches, faint outlines began to form. Children, faces half seen in the light, moving as if through water. The Holloway 5. Gaines took a trembling step closer. "Lucia!" The figures froze, heads turning toward him all at once. Then, just as suddenly, they vanished, petals scattering through the air like ashes. The hum fell silent. He stood alone among the blooming trees. Something brushed against his leg. He looked down to see the young sapling's roots breaking the surface of the soil, stretching outward in every direction. Toward the orchard, toward town, toward the hills that once buried the Holloway home. Red Hollow's roots were waking too. By evening, the blossoms had spread beyond the orchard. Petals drifted down Main Street like pale snow, carried on a wind that no one could feel. They caught in the gutters, clung to windshields, and gathered in soft piles at the steps of the courthouse. Inside the diner, townspeople whispered over coffee cups. Some swore the petals pulsed faintly in the dark. Others claimed they heard children laughing when the wind blew just right. Sheriff Gaines sat in the corner booth, untouched mug cooling beside him. Across from him sat Pastor Everett, the only man in town older than the orchard's legend itself. His thin hands wrapped around his own cup like he was warming them on memory. "You feel it too," the pastor said finally. Gaines nodded, like the ground's breathing. Everett leaned forward. "That's because it is. The orchard was planted over the old well line, you know. When the river shifted back in 2002, the water table fell beneath it. Roots reached down to where the well used to be, where the Holloway homestead was built. They're touching what's buried under there, what's buried?" Gaines asked, though part of him didn't want to know. Everett's voice softened. "The truth. That's what the land does when people lie to it. It grows over the lie until it flowers again." Gaines left before the pastor could say more. The wind carried him back to the ridge by nightfall. The orchard glowed brighter than before, every blossom like a suspended lantern. At the center stood the mother root and its new offspring, now tall enough to meet his eyes. Beneath it, the soil had split in a spiral pattern, the same one from Emma's last frame. The glow pulsed through the cracks like veins. He stepped closer. Something shimmered just below the surface, a fragment of glass. He knelt, brushing away dirt until a shape emerged. A photograph, sealed beneath the soil. He pried it loose carefully. It was old, weathered, yet intact. The image showed the Holloway family standing before the orchard gate in 1954. But this version was different from the one preserved in the town archive. In this photo there were 6 children, not 5. The 6th, a small boy with pale eyes, stood slightly apart, holding something in his hand. Gaines turned the photo toward the light. The object was a seed. The inscription on the back read, "The orchard remembers its keeper." A low rumble passed through the trees. The petals rose into the air like a reversed snowfall, spiraling upward. From beneath the roots, a faint cry echoed, neither pain nor fear, but release. Gaines closed his eyes. For the first time, he understood. The orchard had not taken the Holloway 5. It had kept them. And now, as the 6th child's face faded in the photo, Gaines realized the orchard was asking for one more keeper. The hum grew softer, steadier, waiting. The next morning dawned colorless. The valley lay under a strange stillness, the kind that feels like waiting rather than peace. The blossoms were gone, every last one. Only the faint scent of apple and ash lingered over Red Hollow. Sheriff Gaines parked at the orchard gate and stepped out, his boots crunching over brittle petals that had turned to dust overnight. The sky was bruised gray, the horizon already fading into fog. He knew this quiet. It was the same quiet that had haunted the town for 70 years. He walked the dirt path alone. The orchard no longer shimmered, but something in the air felt alive, humming below the frequency of sound. As he neared the mother root, he saw the young sapling again. It was taller than before, its trunk smooth and pale, its branches heavy with round fruit. Each apple glowed faintly, soft as candlelight, rhythmic as breathing. Gaines counted them. 5. He knew then what it meant. The Holloway 5. He reached out and touched one. The warmth sank into his skin, and suddenly the orchard vanished. He was standing in the Holloway kitchen, sunlight flooding through gingham curtains. The clock ticked steadily above the stove. A woman hummed as she sliced apples, her movements calm and sure. Through the window, 5 children played in the yard, laughing, chasing, their voices filling the air with light. "Mrs. Holloway?" Gaines whispered, though he knew she couldn't hear him. The woman looked up, knife paused mid-cut. Slowly, her gaze shifted to him, straight through the decades, and she smiled faintly. "They wanted to leave," she said. Her voice echoed like wind through branches. "But the land wouldn't let them. It remembers kindness, too." The vision flickered. Outside, the children froze mid-laughter. The world peeled away like film burned at the edge. Gaines stumbled backward, and the orchard returned. He fell to his knees at the sapling's roots. The soil pulsed faintly beneath his palms, warm as skin. From the corner of his eye, he saw the photograph he'd unearthed the night before. It lay half buried again, the faces shifting faintly under a layer of dust. The 6th child's face had changed. It was his own. He closed his eyes, breath catching. In his pocket, his radio crackled. Dispatch calling his name, asking for a report. But the orchard's hum drowned it out. He thought of Emma Vale's words in the recording. Every memory needs a keeper. Maybe that's what the orchard had always waited for. Someone who remembered but hadn't yet been buried. someone who could hold both truth and silence at once. He looked toward the mother root. Beneath its vast crown, the bark had split open, revealing a hollow space glowing with faint, golden light. Inside, he could see faint shapes, shadows of children resting, peaceful at last. The orchard was offering him a choice. Back in town, Pastor Everett felt it first, the shift in the wind. He stepped out of the church just as the fog began to recede. The bells above him, long rusted and mute, began to chime on their own. Across Main Street, people looked up from their porches, shielding their eyes from a sudden burst of light blooming beyond the ridge. The orchard glowed again, but this time, not red. The hue was soft gold, the color of wheat at harvest, of forgiveness. Everett dropped to his knees. "God help him," he whispered. Gaines stepped into the hollow. The light enveloped him, gentle but immense, filling his lungs like breath. He could feel the orchard's pulse matching his heartbeat. Images swarmed behind his eyelids. The Holloway children laughing, Emma smiling behind her camera, the orchard in every season of its life. The soil, the rain, the roots, all remembering, all alive. Then came the final image. The town itself, small and fragile, resting in the cradle of the valley. The orchard's roots pulsed beneath it, spreading under every house, every street. A living map of memory, bound by a single heartbeat. His. When the light faded, Gaines was gone. The hollow stood empty, the soil smooth, undisturbed. Only the young sapling remained, its bark now darkened, its branches bearing 6 glowing apples. Weeks later, news crews returned to Red Hollow. They filmed the orchard from the air, its perfect symmetry, its strange luminescent glow each night. No one could explain it. Some said it was a miracle of soil chemistry. Others whispered about ghosts. Pastor Everett said little. He simply tended the small memorial that now stood at the orchard's edge, a wooden sign bearing 6 names: Lucia, Henry, Clara, Thomas, Ruth, and Sheriff Samuel Gaines. Beneath them, a carved line read, "The orchard keeps what love cannot release." Late that autumn, as leaves began to turn, a child wandered too close to the fence. She said later she'd heard someone humming a lullaby, soft, like her grandmother used to. When her parents found her, she was standing at the gate, staring at the orchard. One of the trees had bent low enough for her to reach. In its branches, a single apple glowed faintly. She plucked it, held it in both hands, and whispered, "Thank you." That night, the orchard's hum stilled completely. The next morning it was just an orchard again, quiet, ordinary, and endlessly alive. The recovered Holloway photograph now hangs in the Red Hollow Historical Museum. Visitors often note the peculiar detail. No matter where one stands, the 6th child's eyes always seem to follow them. Some say it's a trick of light. Others believe the orchard still remembers. And if you listen closely on certain spring nights, when the wind runs through the valley, you might hear it. Soft laughter echoing from the trees, as if the Holloway 5 are still at play.